The Amazon rainforest is one of the most disturbing places on Earth. Everything from disturbing, terrifying animals, to people who got lost in the Amazon rainforest, to diseases and body horror, all the way to disappearances and missing persons. There's so much to cover, this video is gonna be awesome, I'm so excited. Be sure to subscribe or follow on Spotify, wherever you are. If you haven't already, please, it helps so much actually. And then also I have an Instagram that you can follow if you want to, and a Discord where we can hang out, so those are all in the description. But let's get into this. It's Christmas Eve, 1971. 17-year-old Julianne Kopka and her mother board Lanza Flight 508 in Lima, Peru, heading to meet her father in Pucallpa, a city on the edge of the Amazon. The flight is supposed to take an hour. The night before, the two of them had been celebrating Julianne's high school graduation. It should have been the start of a great Christmas. Instead, it becomes one of the most harrowing things a human being has ever survived. Kopka's father had actually urged his wife not to fly with Lanza. The airline had already lost 2 aircraft in previous crashes and had a genuinely bad reputation. But they desperately wanted to be with him for Christmas, so they figured it would be alright. And that detail does make this whole thing scarier. About 25 minutes into the flight, they hit a massive thunderstorm. Lightning was everywhere. Bags were falling out of the overhead compartments, people were screaming. And then a bolt of lightning struck the engine and the plane just broke apart mid-air at 2,100 feet. The last thing Julianne heard was her mother's voice. "Now it's all over," she said calmly. And those were the last words Julianne ever heard from her. And then Julianne was falling. Still strapped to her seat, she dropped 3,000 meters, 10,000 feet, into the Peruvian rainforest below. The forest, she later wrote in her memoir, saved my life, quote unquote, with the thick canopy cushioning what should have been a completely unsurvivable impact. She went in and out of consciousness before finally pulling herself to her feet. Now let's be clear about what she was working with. She had a broken collarbone, a deep laceration on her right arm, a torn knee ligament, an eye injury that left her functionally half blind. Her glasses were gone. A severe concussion, one sandal. The other had been ripped off during the fall. She was wearing a cotton mini dress, and she had a small bag of hard candy that she found near the wreckage. No compass, no map, no knife, no matches, no way to signal the rescue planes that she could occasionally hear flying overhead. That's it. That's what she had. As many as 14 other passengers also survived the fall. They came down in their seats in broken pieces of the fuselage, scattered across the jungle. But they waited for rescue, they didn't move, and they died. But Julianne decided to move. Apparently, her father had told her something once. If you find a creek, follow it, because a creek leads to a stream, and a stream leads to a bigger river, and that's where you'll find people. So that's what she did. Broken collarbone, one sandal, half blind, she found a creek and started walking. The jungle did not make it easy. The undergrowth along the riverbanks was too dense to walk through, so she waded through the water itself. She knew those, so she floated down the middle. That kind of knowledge, knowing which part of the river is relatively safer, is not something that most people would have. Her parents were German zoologists who had built a research station in the Amazon called Panguana when she was 14. She'd been homeschooled there, surrounded by the jungle. She said herself, quote, "I grew up knowing that nothing is really safe, not even the solid ground I walked on." But she also grew up knowing how the jungle worked. Still, knowing things and doing them on a broken collarbone with maggots eating through your arm are two different things. Yeah, maggots. After a few days, she noticed something moving inside the wound on her arm. A fly had laid eggs in it. She was terrified she was going to lose the arm. By the time she reached the lumberjack camp on the 10th day, the wound would produce over 50 botfly maggots. She also found bodies along the way. She came across a row of seats with 3 women still strapped in. They had landed head first, buried almost 2 feet into the ground. She didn't want to touch them, but she needed to know. She needed to know if one of them was her mother. So she took a stick and knocked a shoe off one of the bodies. The toenails had nail polish on them, and apparently her mother never wore nail polish, so she kept walking. On the 10th day, she found a small hut, a lumberjack camp, empty. The workers were out on the river. She found a canoe, a motor, gasoline, and some food. Then she sat down and waited. The next morning, the lumberjacks came back. When they found a pale, injured, one-sandaled teenage girl sitting in their hut, they reportedly thought that she was a water goddess from local mythology, Jemanha, a spirit of the water. But she wasn't a goddess, she was just a 17-year-old. The lumberjacks poured gasoline on her wound to treat it further and then transported her by canoe for 11 hours to a more inhabited area where she was airlifted to a hospital. Of the 92 people aboard Lanza Flight 508, Julianne Kopka was the only one who made it out of the jungle alive. Her mother's body was found on January 12, 1972, weeks after Julianne had already been rescued. And here's the part that haunted Julianne for decades and would have haunted anybody probably. Her mother had actually survived the crash itself, but is believed to have died in the days or weeks afterward, waiting likely for a rescue that never came. Julianne found that out much later. She said the thought, why was I the only one, never really goes away. But Julianne went on to study biology, earned a doctorate, returned to Peru to research bats, and eventually became director of Pan Guana, the same research station her parents had built in the jungle. She published her memoir, When I Fell from the Sky, in 2011. In 1981, Yossi Ginsberg was 22 years old. He had just finished his mandatory military service in the Israeli Navy, and he was restless. He didn't want a normal job, didn't want to go straight to university, he wanted real adventure. So he packed a bag and headed to South America. He ended up in La Paz, Bolivia, a city perched high in the Andes, sitting right on the edge of the Amazon basin. And that's where he met Karl. Karl Ruprechter was a mysterious Austrian who claimed to be a geologist. He told Yossi he was planning an expedition into uncharted Bolivian Amazon in search of gold, and a remote indigenous Takana village that almost no outsiders had ever seen. For a 22-year-old burning with wanderlust, this was basically a dream handed to him by a stranger in a bar. Yossi later said, quote, "He saw how I drank up every word he said. I was naive and begged him to take me with him." Two other travelers got pulled in too. Marcus Stam, a Swiss primary school teacher going through a personal crisis, and Kevin Gale, an American photographer who had literally been about to fly home for Thanksgiving, but decided to come back for Christmas instead. So now you have four strangers, none of whom really know each other, following a man they just met into one of the most dangerous places on Earth. And apparently the locals did warn them and they just ignored it. As their journey began, the group traveled up the Asariamus River into uncharted jungle. But as supplies ran low, the men slowly grew weaker. They were very hungry, walking long days, eating almost nothing. They shot and ate monkeys. Stam refused and was visibly struggling to keep up. He also developed trench foot, a painful condition that comes from prolonged exposure to cold, unsanitary water. And then the cracks in Karl started showing. It turns out that Karl was a sociopath and a compulsive liar. At one point, he told Yossi that the Israeli couldn't visit his uncle's Bolivian ranch because the man was a fugitive Nazi war criminal who hated Jews. Yossi later discovered that Karl actually had no such uncle. The stories about the gold, the hidden village, and even his expertise as a guide, all of it was fabricated. When they reached the meeting of the rivers Tuchi and Ipurama, Karl suddenly revealed two things: that there was a dangerous series of rapids and waterfalls ahead called San Pedro Canyon, and that he couldn't swim. A guide who couldn't swim in the Amazon, leading people into the wilderness on a raft. The group broke apart. Ruprechter and Stam decided to walk out overland to the nearest village. Gale and Ginsberg decided to keep going by raft on the Tuchi River, planning to meet everyone back in La Paz before Christmas. And that was actually the last time anyone ever saw Karl Ruprechter or Marcus Stam. Neither of them was ever found. But Yossi didn't know that yet. What he knew was that he and Kevin were on a raft and the river was about to go very wrong. As their raft neared a waterfall, they lost control. Gale managed to make it to shore, but Ginsberg was swept downriver and over the falls. Yossi later said, quote, "There were moments of great despair, but falling down that waterfall wasn't one of them. It was a roller coaster ride which lasted for 15 or 20 minutes. All I could do was keep my head above water. When I finally arrived on shore, I had a moment of complete exhilaration that I'd survived. A few seconds later came the first feeling of disaster. Even then, I thought it would only be a few hours until we connected again. The toughest moment was after a few days, when I realized I was completely alone," unquote. And alone he was. The nights, he said, were the worst of all. Quote, "As darkness descends, there is no light whatsoever. The canopy swallows the stars and the moon, and the darkness is as thick as velvet. At night, all the noises emerge, the screeches and roars and barks and calls, and things are moving around. It was simply overwhelming, and I had no fire or gun to protect myself," unquote. He foraged for berries, bird eggs from nests, and waited for a monkey to fall so he could eat it. He drank river water knowing that it could make him sick, and the jungle just kept attacking him. He was bitten thousands of times by bees, wasps, and mosquitoes, with some bugs burrowing larvae under his skin and hatched and fed on his flesh. Famine left him nothing but skin hanging on bones. Then came the jaguar. On his 6th night in the jungle, he woke to find a jaguar circling him, ready to attack. He had a can of mosquito repellent and a cigarette lighter. He made an improvised flamethrower and drove it away. A can of bug spray between him and a jaguar. That's the margin he was working with. Then came the flood. One night, heavy rains caused the river to rise suddenly. Yossi, sleeping on a small patch of dry land, woke to find himself being swept away by raging water. He barely managed to grab onto a log and cling for his life until it subsided. He sank into a bog twice. For 5 days after that, he had no food at all, and his feet began to rot from fungus. By day 17, his feet were so raw that he could no longer walk. There was no skin left, just 2 chunks of exposed flesh oozing pus. He said, quote, "I couldn't take the pain. I dragged myself to a tree full of fire ants and shook it on my head. The waves of pain and adrenaline distracted me from my feet," unquote. And then his mind started to go. A woman appeared to him. Quote, "She appeared in the worst moment when I really gave up. I talked to her all the time, but she didn't talk back. I built a camp for us both and made a space for her to sleep next to me," unquote. Then she disappeared, and Yossi worried that he had lost his sanity. The woman was a hallucination. The Amazon had taken everything from him. Then he heard a rescue plane. He jumped to his feet and ran, screaming, waving his arms. He said, "The surge of hope that it will be all over in a minute if I am seen." But under the forest canopy, he was invisible from above. The plane passed and disappeared. He collapsed into the mud, feet on fire. From the depths of his heart, he was praying to die. He gave up on life. But Kevin Gale hadn't. Kevin had made it back to civilization and organized a search with Bolivian locals. They had almost given up. They couldn't find a place to turn the boat around. They were forced to push further upstream to land. And in the whole of the Amazon, the spot where they landed happened to be exactly where Yossi had collapsed unconscious. When Gale brought Yossi back to civilization, the locals said that they wouldn't have been able to survive what he had. He spent 3 months in hospital recovering. And here's where it gets even crazier. When Kevin returned to La Paz and reported Carl and Marcus missing, he went to the Austrian consulate for help. That's when the authorities told him that Karl Ruprechter was a criminal wanted by Interpol. He wasn't a geologist, there was no gold, there wasn't any kind of hidden village. He was just a con man. And again, Ruprechter and Stam have never been found. Percy Fawcett had the kind of resume that sounds almost made up. British artilleryman, spy in Morocco, World War I veteran, and, most famously, the man who made half a dozen map-making expeditions into the Amazon at a time when almost no European had ever gone there, a place he called the last great blank space in the world. Between 1906 and 1924, he made 7 expeditions across the Amazon basin, and he survived all of them. He came home with stories of giant anacondas and hostile tribes, which, by the way, we'll get to all that kind of stuff later on in this video. He was celebrated by the Royal Geographical Society. He won medals, and somewhere along the way, he became completely dangerously obsessed with something he could never let go of. He called it the City of Z. The idea of a lost city wasn't new. Since the days of the first conquistadors, the European imagination had been haunted by the myth of El Dorado. But Fawcett was different. He didn't think El Dorado was real. What he did believe was that the Amazon could support a complex civilization, and that somewhere in the Mato Grosso region of Brazil, the ruins of one were still waiting to be found. The thing that really lit the fuse was a document that he found in the National Library of Brazil. It was called Manuscript 512, written by a Portuguese explorer in 1753, who claimed to have found a walled city deep in the Amazon. Multi-story buildings, arches, statues, wide streets, and carved letters on the walls that resembled ancient Greek script. Some scholars considered it a forgery, others thought it was authentic. Richard Burton had been intrigued by it in the 1860s. Fawcett was convinced it was real. And with that resume earlier, once Fawcett was convinced of something, there was basically no stopping him. In April 1925, at 58 years old, Fawcett made his move. He was even better financed than ever, funded by newspapers, the Royal Geographical Society, and even the Rockefellers. With him were two companions, his eldest son Jack, who was 22, and Jack's best friend named Raleigh Rimmel. Because they had sold the rights to the journey to a group of North American newspapers, the trio had 40 million readers following along. The whole world was watching. On April 20th, 1925, they set off from Cuiabá, Brazil, into a sweltering maze of dense undergrowth, piranha-infested waters, and unmapped territory. In the early weeks, it was insects that proved the most immediate threat. Mosquitoes, blood-sucking gnats, ticks. Rimmel's foot had become severely swollen from tick bites. Fawcett set a punishing pace of 10 to 15 miles a day, sometimes getting so far ahead of the younger men that he had to camp alone for a night. On May 29th, they reached a spot called Dead Horse Camp, the same place where, years earlier, Fawcett had been forced to shoot his exhausted horse and then turn back during one of his previous searches for Z. This was a place he knew well, and it was also the last place he was ever confirmed to be. There, they unloaded their equipment, sent their guides back to Cuiabá, and Fawcett handed over the last of the expedition's dispatches. Among them was a letter to his wife, Nina. Quote, "Jack is well and fit and getting stronger every day," he wrote. "You need have no fear of any failure." And then the three of them walked into the jungle alone. The last line he wrote to her was, "We shall disappear from civilization until next year. Imagine us in forests so far untrodden by civilized man." And then, they really did disappear. The Kalapalo people, the last tribe to have seen them, had an oral account. They said the three men passed through their village and kept heading east into the territory of what the Kalapalos called the Fierce Indians. The Kalapalos watched for the expedition's campfire each evening for 5 days, and then the fires stopped. The Royal Geographical Society officially declared the men lost in January 1927, nearly 2 years after the last letter. Almost immediately, volunteers flooded in, offering to go find them. And this is where it gets really insane. So over 100 people actually died trying to find Fawcett in the decades that followed. Think about that. 100 lives lost looking for 3. Expeditions plunged into the Xingu one after another. A journalist named Albert de Winton went in alone to look for Fawcett. He was never seen again. An explorer named George Diet came back claiming that he'd found evidence the party had been killed by a tribe called the Aleque Indians, but had no bodies to prove it. One of the search expeditions was even headed by Peter Fleming, the brother of Ian Fleming, the man who would go on to create James Bond. None of them found anything definitive, and every expedition just added to this mystery without doing anything to solve it. Over the years, theories piled up. Researchers blamed the disappearance on everything from malaria and a parasitic infection to starvation, drowning, and jaguar attacks. Some argued that Fawcett, a longtime dabbler in mysticism, had vanished on purpose and set up an occult commune in the jungle. In 1951, a Kalapalo chief claimed his tribe had killed the explorers after Fawcett insulted them and slapped one of their children. Bones were produced, they were sent to England for analysis and confirmed to be Fawcett's. But then later analysis confirmed that they were not Fawcett's. The Kalapalos had probably confessed solely to collect the reward, which turned out to be 10 pounds of glass beads and a roll of fishing line worth $75. In 1979, Fawcett's signet ring turned up in a pawn shop, leading some to believe bandits had murdered the party and dumped the bodies in a river. No one has ever proven it. No one has ever proven anything about this. But here's the strangest part of all of this, though, is that Fawcett might not have been wrong. American archaeologist Michael Heckenberger spent years living with the Quikuro people near where Fawcett vanished. He didn't find any kind of stone walls, but he did find something arguably more impressive, a massive network of ancient settlements now known as the Garden Cities of the Xingu, a grid-like structure of towns connected by wide straight roads surrounded by defensive ditches and moats. A complex society of perhaps 50,000 people flourishing from around 500 AD until European diseases wiped them out in the 16th century. In 2022, LiDAR surveys of settlements near the Llanos de Moxos revealed the ruins of pyramids, causeways, and other infrastructure, directly supporting Fawcett's theory that the Amazon had once held advanced civilizations. The city he imagined wasn't there, but something pretty close was. Fawcett had left explicit instructions before they left. If they did not return, no one should send a rescue team. He believed the jungle was too dangerous, he said that himself. He knew what was out there. He went anyway and brought his son with him. They have never been found. 100 years later, nobody knows what happened to them. All the stories that we've talked about so far have been about adults, or at least 17, but most have been experienced, capable grown-ups who were lost in the Amazon. But this next one is different. This one involves 4 kids. The oldest was 13. The youngest was 11 months. On May 1st, 2023, a single-engine Cessna plane crashed into the Amazon rainforest in Colombia. On board, there were 3 adults and 4 children, siblings named Leslie, Solini, Tien, and Kristen. The family was traveling from their village of Aracahuara to the town of San Jose de Guaviare in southeastern Colombia. It was the first time their mother, Magdalena, had ever left her home village. 35 minutes into the flight, the engine failed. The plane nosedived into the jungle. The 3 adults up front died, but the back of the plane, where the kids were sitting, was barely damaged. So now you have 4 children alone in the Colombian Amazon. The youngest still in diapers, and the oldest, a 13-year-old girl named Leslie, suddenly responsible for all of them. And this is one of the most horrifying parts of this story. Their mom didn't die right away. Leslie later told her family that her mother was alive for about 4 days after the crash. And before she died, she told the children to leave her and go find help. A 13-year-old had to say goodbye to her dying mother in the middle of the Amazon and then pick up her baby sister and start walking. Researchers and family members believe the kids left the crash site quickly, partly to get away from the bodies, which would attract dangerous animals, and partly to go start looking for food and water. Now, these kids were not random city kids who happened to be on a plane. They were members of the Huototo indigenous community, and they had grown up in the jungle. A Colombian anthropologist who had lived with the family for years said the children were constantly climbing trees, gathering edible fruit, and taking part in ceremonies that celebrated the jungle's bounty. They knew which plants to eat. They knew how the forest worked. They weren't prepared for a plane crash, but they were prepared for the jungle in a way that really very few people on Earth are. At first, they stayed near the wreckage and ate the cassava flour, a type of coarse food staple that the plane had been carrying. When that ran out, Leslie fed the baby formula that she had grabbed from the crash site, and when that ran out, she fed the baby water. For the next several weeks, they ate seeds, roots, plants, and whatever berries they could find and identify as safe. To protect themselves from predators at night, they hid inside hollow tree trunks. When it rained, which in the Colombian Amazon during rainy season is basically all the time, they pulled large leaves and branches together and sheltered underneath them. Meanwhile, the search was going completely insane trying to find them. It took 2 full weeks just to locate the plane. The area was covered in mist, constant rain, and dense canopy that blocked visibility from the air. When search teams finally found the wreckage on May 16th, they recovered the bodies of the 3 adults, but the children were nowhere to be found. They were just gone. And here's where it gets interesting, because the fact that they weren't there was actually hope. Soldiers and indigenous volunteers started finding clues: half-eaten fruit, small footprints, a baby bottle, a pair of tiny shoes, proving that the children were moving and they were alive. Colombia sent in 150 soldiers with dogs. Dozens of indigenous community volunteers joined the search. Helicopters dropped boxes of food into the jungle from above, hoping the kids might find them. Planes flew over at night firing flares, and in a move that might be the most heartbreaking detail of the whole story, rescuers rigged up loudspeakers and flew them over the jungle, blasting a recorded message from the children's grandmother, in their own language, Witoto, telling them to stay calm and stay in one place. But the kids were hiding from them. They could hear the dogs barking and got scared. They thought the soldiers might be guerrillas coming after them. There was actually an abandoned rebel encampment near the crash site, so that fear really wasn't crazy. Soldiers came within 50 feet of the children at least twice during the search and didn't find them, because the kids were tucked inside trees staying completely still. 40 days, no adult, no real food, a baby to keep alive, and they kept choosing not to be found because they were scared of the people looking for them. In the end, it was a Belgian shepherd rescue dog named Wilson that finally made contact. Wilson found the children first, and from the kids' perspective, that actually helped. When the dog appeared, it was a relief. "Someone is here," they said. Wilson was friendly, and the sight of a dog eased the tension enough that when the soldiers came close behind them, the kids didn't run. The first human to actually see the children was a young volunteer named Ordóñez, 27 years old, who had been recruited by FARC as a child soldier and had later gone through a government reintegration program. He had once sworn to fight the Colombian military. Now he was working alongside them, and he was about to become a national hero. He spotted Leslie and Soligny in the forest, ran toward them, and when rescuers finally got them corralled, one of the girls was clutching baby Kristen. They just had to find 4-year-old Tien, and they did. The children were airlifted to a military hospital in Bogota, wrapped in thermal blankets, a soldier holding a bottle to the baby's lips. They were painfully thin and covered in insect bites, but they were alive, all 4 of them. When the family came to visit, one of the younger kids said, quote, "Uncle, I want shoes. I want to walk, but my feet hurt." And the uncle told him, "When you recover, we will play soccer." That's so sweet. The general who led the search operation said their survival came down to 3 things: the will to stay alive, their immunity to many jungle hazards as indigenous people, and the fact that they simply knew the jungle. That's pretty crazy. A 13-year-old girl knew the jungle well enough to keep herself, a 9-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a baby alive for 40 days. Over a month. I mean, holy fuck, like, shout out to Leslie. That's insane. Every story we've talked about in this video involves people trying to survive the Amazon, but this one is different. This one is about a man who survived the Amazon for over 26 years, completely alone. Not because of a crash or a wrong turn, but because the outside world had already taken everything from him, and he refused to let it near him again. Now, I know that's super overdramatic and stuff, but this story is pretty cool. His name was never actually known. We don't even know what language he spoke. We don't know what his people called themselves. We don't even know what he called himself. But the whole world came to know him as the Man of the Hole. His tribe lived in western Brazil, bordering Bolivia. The majority of his people were killed by settlers starting in the 1970s, around the same time that nearby tribes were going through similar massacres. Farmers and ranchers were pushing into the Amazon, clearing land, and indigenous communities were in the way. Sometime in the 1980s, illegal ranchers gave his tribe offerings of sugar laced with rat poison, which killed most of the tribe's remaining members. They were poisoned through a fake gift. The people who survived that attack, about 6 remaining members, were then shot and killed by illegal miners in 1995. One person survived. Him. FUNAI, Brazil's government agency for indigenous affairs, first became aware he was still alive in 1996 when they discovered the remains of his village, which had been bulldozed by ranchers. Think about that for a second. They found the ruins of his entire world, flattened by tractors, and somewhere out in the forest nearby, he was still there. From 1996 until his death in 2022, he lived completely alone. He resisted every single attempt to make contact with him. The authorities monitored him from a distance, occasionally leaving out supplies, but he never came to them. He had made his choice, and given what had happened to everyone he had ever known, that choice makes complete sense. FUNAI tried for years to reach him. He shot arrows at workers who got too close. In 2004, he fired one that actually struck a FUNAI worker. The worker recovered, but after that, the agency officially stopped trying to make contact in 2005. Their coordinator at the time, Altair Algeir, the man who would end up monitoring him for 26 years, said something that's pretty interesting. Quote, "I understand his decision. It is his sign of resistance and a little repudiation, hate, knowing the story he went through." Unquote. So what did his life actually look like out there? Because of Algeir's team doing regular check-ins from a distance, by helicopter every few months for over 2 decades, we actually do know more than you'd expect. He hunted with a bow and arrow targeting wild pigs, monkeys, and birds. He planted small crops of manioc and bananas using basic tools. He gathered fruit, honey, and plant fibers to make baskets and hammocks. He moved around constantly, building a new hut and then abandoning it. Algeir described him as an excellent hunter and, based on everything they observed, genuinely intelligent, which helps explain how one person kept themselves alive alone in the Amazon for that long. FUNAI occasionally left gifts of tools and seeds out for him, but he rarely took them. But something small did develop over the years. According to FUNAI official Bruno Pereira, the act of leaving things built a certain level of trust. Not enough for contact, but enough that he would sometimes signal to the monitoring teams to warn them about pitfall traps he had dug so they wouldn't fall in. He was warning the people he didn't trust about the holes he had dug to protect himself from people he didn't trust. It's kind of weird, but I guess we'll never know what he was really thinking or what his reasons were. And then there are the holes themselves. His nickname came from a specific detail. Inside every hut he built and later abandoned, he dug a rectangular hole, about 40 centimeters wide, 80 centimeters long, and between 1.4 and 1.8 meters deep. Over the years, FUNAI identified 53 different places he had lived, every single one with the same structure. A small straw hut, one door, and a hole. Some holes out in the forest had sharpened stakes at the bottom, clearly traps for animals. But the ones inside his homes were different. Algeir, who spent more time thinking about this man than probably anyone on Earth, said he believed the holes had some kind of spiritual or religious meaning, although no one ever actually found any proof of what that was. Fiona Watson from Survival International said, "The holes are a mystery that has died with him." And yeah, even though he refused contact and shot at people who got close, he was still attacked in November 2009 by armed gunmen and survived. Someone tried to kill the last man of a nearby extinct tribe and he survived that too. Then in August 2022, Altair Algeir went out on a routine monitoring trip. He found the man of the hole lying in his hammock outside his last hut covered in macaw feathers. There were no signs of violence, no signs of anyone else having been there. He had died sometime in July, alone as he had lived, but apparently on his own terms. An indigenous expert who examined the scene said the man had likely arranged the feathers on himself in preparation for his own death. He knew it was coming and he got ready for it the way his people had always done, even though his people were gone. There's one more thing worth saying here. Brazil has an estimated 114 uncontacted indigenous groups still living in the Amazon. The man of the hole isn't a story from the distant past, it's a story from 4 years ago, and it's still happening to other people right now. Now I want to move into some of the disturbing animals and just things like that in the Amazon. So first, the green anaconda. The green anaconda is the heaviest snake in the world. Some recorded individuals reach 30 feet long and weigh over 550 pounds. Their average girth is about 30 centimeters, roughly a foot in diameter. They live in swamps, marshes, and slow-moving streams in the Amazon. On land, they're pretty heavy and awkward. In the water, they're completely different, silent, fast, and almost impossible to see. They can hold their breath for about 10 minutes. Their eyes and nostrils sit on top of their head, so they can lie almost completely submerged and still see and breathe, just waiting for something to come close enough. They detect scents through their tongues, heat signatures through pit organs in their upper lip, and vibrations through the water. Once they grab something, they lock on with their jaws and coil around it until they can't breathe. And they don't actually crush bones or anything like that, they just kind of wait for the prey to not breathe anymore. Every time the prey exhales, the coils get slightly tighter until there's no room left to breathe in. Larger prey gets pulled underwater and drowned first. Their diet includes pigs, deer, bird, turtles, capybara, caimans, and jaguars. Their jaw is connected by flexible ligaments that let it stretch wide enough to swallow prey larger than the diameter of their own body. Females are significantly bigger than males and have been known to eat them after mating. This is absolutely insane. This is one of the coolest animals ever, and I know that it's pretty popular. You probably already know about this thing, but I just had to cover it because this is honestly terrifying and honestly, like, fucking insane. Like, this kind of thing just should not be real, you know? Next up is the black caiman. The black caiman is the largest predator in the Amazon River Basin and the largest member of the alligator family. Most adults measure between 13 and 16 feet long and weigh around 770 pounds, with larger individuals pushing past 880 pounds. They are nocturnal hunters, using sharp vision and hearing to navigate in complete darkness. Their scales are nearly black, which makes them almost invisible in the murky Amazon water at night. By the time prey spots the gleam of their eyes, it's already too late. That's the thing people who've been on the Amazon at night describe. You'll be on a boat with a flashlight, sweep it under the water, and all you see are pairs of glowing eyes sitting just above the surface. And you can't see the body, you have no idea how big it is. They mostly hunt from the water, but will also come onto land at night to chase prey. Adults eat catfish, piranhas, capybara, deer, boars, dogs, snakes, and livestock. Larger prey that can't be swallowed whole get stored underwater until the flesh rots enough for the caiman to bite chunks off. And really, their diet essentially has no ceiling. There's evidence of them eating jaguars and anacondas, two animals that are themselves apex predators. Green anacondas, jaguars, and black caimans are effectively competing for the top spot in the same food chain. Young black caimans eat piranhas and older ones eat pythons. Some have been known to cannibalize their own system. Amazon river dolphins have been found with scars consistent with caiman attacks, and studies suggest that even jaguars actively avoid lakes and swamps where large adult black caimans live. They're also dangerous to people. Several dozen attacks on humans have been recorded since 2000. Most victims were swimming, bathing, or crossing rivers when attacked. They don't stalk humans the way that Nile crocodiles do. They attack out of opportunity, not preference. But when the opportunity is there, they take it. The one structural weakness that they do actually have is that their teeth grip but don't chew. Everything has to go down whole or in pieces torn off by spinning the body. Their bite force is strong enough to shatter a turtle shell, though, in a single snap. Even big cats like cougars will avoid the lakes where they live. In a river system full of dangerous animals, this is the one that even the other dangerous animals steer clear of. Next is the candiru. The candiru is a near-transparent parasitic catfish found in the rivers of Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Bolivia, and Brazil. It's also known as the toothpick fish and, more accurately, the vampire fish. In the wild, it attaches itself to the gills of larger fish, wedges in using sharp spines, and feeds on blood. That's the actual animal. Small, translucent, genuinely creepy. But then the legend got a hold of it, and I guarantee you've heard the legend behind this fish before. Since the 19th century, reports from the Amazon have described the candiru swimming up the urine stream of a person wading in water, entering the urethra, locking in with its barbs, and being impossible to remove without surgery. The fear was so widespread among local men that some used protective coverings and even tied ligatures around their penises before going into the water. The story spread across the world and became probably the most feared thing about swimming in the Amazon. Here's the problem though, because most of it really does not hold up. The original idea was that the candiru hunts by detecting urine because larger fish emit urine through their gills, or urea or something. But research later showed that the fish actually hunts by sight, not smell, and is not at all attracted to human urine. On top of that, the physics of the swimming up a urine stream just doesn't really work. It's been known conclusively for over a century that this is physically impossible, based on basic fluid dynamics. As of now, there is only one case of a candiru entering a human urethra in all of recorded history. It happened in 1997. A 23-year-old man named Silvio Barbosa claimed a candiru jumped from the water into his urethra while he was urinating thigh-deep in a river in Brazil. He traveled to Manaus and underwent a 2-hour surgery performed by a urologist to have it removed. The surgery is real, and the fish is real. It's actually preserved in a jar in the National Institute of Amazonian Research. But the story of how it got there is where things kind of fall apart. When marine biologist Stephen Spott later examined the preserved specimen, he found it was 133 millimeters long with a head diameter of 11.5 millimeters, which would have required significant force to enter a urethra. The candiru has no limbs or mechanism capable of doing that, and if it had leaped out of the water, as the patient claimed, it wouldn't have had the leverage to force its way in. So what actually happened in 1997 is genuinely unclear. The surgery happened, the fish was inside of him, but when you start to think about how it's impossible for it to have swam up there, I don't want to think about how it got there. And what the candiru actually does to larger fish, latching in with its spines and feeding on blood from the inside, is disturbing enough on its own. The legend just decided that wasn't scary enough and then just made it worse for some reason, but it is a great story. I mean, that shit is scary as fuck. I remember hearing about that like years ago, like in middle school. Next up is the electric eel. Electric eels can generate an electrical charge of up to 600 volts. And one recently identified species pushes that up to 860 volts. And for reference, a standard wall outlet in the US is 120 volts. Their bodies contain electric organs with about 6,000 specialized cells called electrocytes that work like stacked batteries. When threatened or attacking, all of them fire at once. They run almost the entire length of the animal's body. Electric eels can grow up to 8 feet long and weigh up to 44 pounds. They actually use electricity in 3 different ways. There's a low voltage output they use constantly to navigate and sense their environment, essentially echolocation but with electricity. Then there are 2 high voltage modes for hunting. First, they fire quick paired pulses called doublets that cause a sudden, massive, full-body twitch in nearby prey, enough to make a hidden fish flinch and reveal its location. Then they hit it with sustained volleys that cause rapid, uncontrollable muscle contractions, totally exhausting the prey within seconds. The prey doesn't get stunned so much as it gets its own muscles turned against it until they give out. Electric eels have also been observed leaping out of the water to deliver shocks to animals they perceive as threats. And research shows a leaping shock is actually more powerful than an underwater one, because less electricity disperses into the water around it. For humans, a single shock from a large eel is intensely painful and disorienting. The shock forces skeletal muscles into violent involuntary contractions and can cause partial paralysis of the limbs. Deaths from electric eels are extremely rare, but multiple shocks can cause respiratory failure or heart failure, and people have drowned in shallow water after being stunned by a single jolt. And that last part really is like the real danger. It's not that the shock kills you directly, it's that you're suddenly unable to control your body while you're standing in a river. There are documented cases from Brazil of electric eel injuries serious enough to require hospitalization, including at least one fatality. The animal is not aggressive toward humans by default, but in murky, slow-moving Amazon water, where you can't often see what's below the surface, accidentally stepping on or near one is a real possibility. Next up is bullet ant. Most of the things on this list can kill you, The bullet ant probably won't, but it'll make you wish that it had. The bullet ant holds the top spot on the Schmidt Sting Pain Index, a scale created by entomologist Justin Schmidt to rank the pain of insect stings. On a scale of 1 to 4, the bullet ant is the only insect to score a 4+. Schmidt described the experience as, quote, walking over flaming charcoal with a 3-inch nail embedded in your heel. Some victims compare it to being shot, which is where the name comes from. The pain is described as waves of burning, throbbing, all-consuming agony that continues unabated for up to 24 hours. In Venezuela, they have a different name for it, hormigo 24, or the 24-hour ant, referring to the full day of pain that follows a single sting. The venom is a neurotoxin called ponerotoxin. It affects voltage-dependent sodium ion channels and blocks synaptic transmission in the central nervous system. Basically, it hijacks your nervous system's pain signaling and turns the volume up as high as it can go. Even a single sting can cause fever, chills, tachycardia, cardiac arrhythmias, swelling, nausea, vomiting, and temporary paralysis of the limbs. A person can need 2 weeks to fully recover from one sting. The ants themselves can grow up to 30 millimeters long, which is about 1.25 inches, making them one of the largest ant species in the world. They live in colonies at the bases of trees in the lowland rainforest and forage up into the canopy. They're not aggressive unless their nest is threatened, but in the Amazon, where you're pushing through vegetation constantly, accidentally disturbing a colony is not a small risk. Now, some people actually do this on purpose. The Satare Mawe people of the Brazilian Amazon have a coming-of-age ritual for young men that involves bullet ants being woven into gloves made of leaves. Sting a one-time thing either. To fully complete the initiation, a young man must go through this ritual 20 times over the course of months or years. After the first ritual, the boy can marry and start a family, but he'll be expected to return to the glove at least 20 more times in his lifetime, which is, god, crazy. And next up is Brazilian wandering spiders. Most spiders you encounter are sitting in a web somewhere waiting. You see the web, you go around it, everybody moves on with their day. But this is not how it works with the Brazilian wandering spider. These spiders don't build webs. They crawl on the forest floor at night, actively hunting prey. That's where the name comes from. They wander. Their wandering nature is one of the main reasons they're considered so dangerous. There's no web to warn you, no fixed location to avoid. They're just moving through the same undergrowth, leaf litter, and dark spaces that you are. They can grow to a leg span of 13 to 18 centimeters, up to about 7 inches. And they've held the Guinness World Record for most venomous spider. Their venom contains a neurotoxin called PHTX3, which acts as a broad-spectrum calcium channel blocker that inhibits glutamate release in neural synapses. At high doses, it causes loss of muscle control and breathing problems, leading to paralysis and asphyxiation. Symptoms of a bite include double vision, heavy salivation, irregular heartbeat, hypertension, sweating, and vomiting. In severe cases, particularly in children, a bite can be fatal without antivenom. There are around 4,000 recorded envenomation cases in Brazil every year. That's crazy. Then there's the symptom that really gets people's attention. This is crazy. I really didn't believe this. Like, this is kind of crazy, but the venom can cause priapism, which is a long, prolonged, painful erection that can last hours. This can persist for 4 to 12 hours and is extremely painful because it affects the vascular tissue while leaving the gland soft. It sounds almost absurd until you realize that if the bite goes untreated, this is happening alongside cardiac irregularities and progressive asphyxia. Scientists are actually studying this venom as a possible treatment for erectile dysfunction, which is one of the stranger footnotes in spider research. But the reason these spiders turn up so constantly in nightmare lists isn't just the venom. In populated areas, they hide during the day in dark and closed spaces. Inside houses, and clothes, and shoes, and boots, and cardboard boxes, and log piles. They've also been found in banana shipments that traveled to Europe and North America, though many of those reported cases turn out to be a harmless lookalike species called Cupienius that gets misidentified. Still, enough real ones have made the trip to keep the story alive. So please be careful if you are living in Brazil and you open your shoebox, cause holy fuck. Next up we have piranhas, which are very popular in the zeitgeist, but they kinda get overblown. A direct, unprovoked fatal attack on a healthy person in the water is virtually unheard of. In the rare cases where piranhas have been connected to a human death, the victim almost always died from another cause, drowning or a medical condition, before the fish started feeding. They don't travel in schools to hunt in groups, they school to protect themselves from predators. They're actually pretty low on the food chain, preyed on by birds, dolphins, caimans, and larger fish. So what are they actually? They're essentially the vultures of freshwater. Even the most carnivorous species, the red-bellied piranha, mostly scavenges rather than attacks live prey. They function as an ecological cleanup crew, kind of, consuming carrion and keeping rivers healthy. But here is where it stops being reassuring. During the dry season, water levels drop. Large numbers of piranhas get trapped in shrinking pools with limited food, and they get desperate. They will risk attacking something larger than themselves just to survive. In these crowded, stress conditions, the fish become bolder and more likely to bite. Accidental injuries typically involve a single quick bite to the hands or feet, the fish mistaking you for an injured animal or bait. Of 711 documented cases of piranha bites in Brazil over 10 years, 82% were classified as mild, single punch-out shaped injuries. The most common trigger was males protecting nests during breeding season. Other factors included the dry season, improper disposal of food in rivers, and dammed stretches of water where fish become crowded. In 2013, a massive attack in Argentina left 70 swimmers injured in the Paraná River. Witnesses said the fish were very aggressive and that some people had bits of flesh torn from them. Medical officers said it was an exceptional event driven by unusually warm weather pushing the fish into a crowded area. So they can be dangerous, but they do get kind of overblown. Next up is the Amazonian giant centipede. The Amazonian giant centipede is the largest known centipede in the world. Most specimens found in museum collections range from 5 to 9 inches, but individuals up to 11 inches have been recorded. They're reddish brown or black with yellow legs, flat-bodied, and move fast enough that by the time you notice one, it's already halfway across whatever surface it was on. At the front of its head are structures called forciples, modified legs that work like claws, which it uses to seize prey and inject venom. The venom is powerful enough that it kills most small animals almost instantly, and their diet includes insects, spiders, lizards, small rodents, frogs, and birds. The bat hunting is worth its own mention too. In caves in Venezuela, these centipedes have been documented scaling the walls, gripping the ceiling with their back legs, and launching out into the air to snatch bats mid-flight. A nearly foot-long venomous arthropod hanging upside down from a cave roof catching things out of the air is really not something that most people have on their radar when they think about what's in the Amazon. When hunting on the ground, they coil themselves around prey to trap it before biting. They cut larger prey into pieces as they eat it. For humans, the venom causes severe pain, fever, swelling, fatigue, and chills. It's unlikely to kill an adult unless they're allergic, though at least one human death has been confirmed from a bite. They live under rocks, bark, and forest debris during the day, and come out at night to hunt, which means they're sharing dark spaces with anything that might reach a hand under a log or step off a trail without looking. Next up is botflies. This one isn't about being attacked, it's about not noticing something is wrong until it's been happening for weeks. So the human botfly has a life cycle that feels pretty specifically designed to be as disturbing as possible. The adult fly does not land on you directly. Instead, it catches a mosquito or other blood-sucking insect, glues its eggs to that insect's body, and releases it. When that mosquito lands on you to feed, the warmth of your skin triggers the eggs to hatch. The larvae burrow in through the bite wound within minutes, and you probably won't even feel it happening. Once under the skin, the larvae develop rows of tiny backward-pointing spines that anchor them in place. They breathe through a small hole in the surface, which they also use to expel waste. They can grow up to 3 centimeters in length and can stay inside a host for 6 to 12 weeks. The first sign is a small nodule that keeps getting slowly bigger over weeks. Unlike a regular insect bite, the wound keeps discharging blood and fluid because the larvae need to keep the hole open to breathe. Other symptoms include itching, swelling, a foul smell, and the one that really gets people, a detectable sensation of movement under the skin. Oh my god. You can apparently feel it shifting position. The lump looks something like a pimple with a small hole in the center, and that hole is where the larva has poked its breathing tube up. Removal has to be done carefully. Squeezing it out is a bad idea. Rupturing the larva inside the wound can trigger an allergic reaction and leave fragments that can cause serious infection. One method is smothering the hole with Vaseline, cutting off the larva's air supply until it works its way to the surface. In other cases, a doctor needs to make an incision under local anesthetic, widen the wound, and pull it out with forceps. The larval stage can last anywhere from 27 to 128 days before it exits on its own, drops to the ground, and pupates in the soil. If left alone, it will eventually leave by itself. It will just take up to 4 months, growing the entire time, while you can feel it move around under your skin. Cases are very common among the residents and visitors to tropical regions of the Americas. Survivors who have spent time in the Amazon, including several researchers and journalists who have written about it, describe finding them in their scalps, arms, and necks after trips, often having thought the growing lump was just an infected mosquito bite. The Juliane Kopka story earlier in this video is actually a pretty good example. She described pulling maggots from her arm wound during her 11-day survival, and what she was experiencing was likely this. Next up is the Goliath bird eater, which is a badass name. The Goliath bird eater holds the Guinness World Record as the heaviest spider on Earth. It can reach up to 12 inches in leg span and weigh more than 170 grams, heavier than a sparrow. Its fangs can exceed 3 centimeters, over an inch long. It is brown, hairy, and the size of a dinner plate. The name comes from a Victorian-era story, which is difficult to verify, about one being spotted consuming a hummingbird. Their actual diet is mostly earthworms, insects, frogs, small lizards, and the occasional rodent or bat. It probably does eat birds sometimes, but it's not a regular thing. It's just a thing it's capable of. It lives in burrows in the swampy rainforests of Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and northern Brazil, and comes out at night to hunt. Its venom is relatively harmless to humans, comparable to a wasp sting. It also bites in self-defense, though not all bites actually inject venom. What it does instead when it feels threatened is arguably more interesting than a venomous bite. It has 3 escalating responses. First, it rubs hair on its legs together to create a hissing noise, called stridulation, that can be heard up to 15 feet away. A spider the size of your face making an audible hissing sound in the dark is not something most people are prepared for. If that doesn't work, it rubs its abdomen with its hind legs and releases barbed, urticating hairs, tiny irritating bristles that it actively flicks toward the threat. These cause intense irritation on skin and are particularly nasty if they contact eyes or any kind of mucous membranes. And if that still doesn't work, it rears up on its hind legs to display its fangs. So, hissing, hair flinging, and then fangs, in that order. A very deliberate system of warnings from an animal that is technically not that dangerous, but is doing everything in its power to make you feel like it is. Females can live up to 20 years, and males live 3 to 6. The male's entire adult life is essentially a brief sprint to mate before being killed, often by the female. The Amazon really does not go easy on anyone. Next up is tarantula hawk wasps. The adults are harmless enough. They feed on nectar and are generally non-aggressive toward humans unless provoked. They're large, the biggest species grow to about 2 inches long, with midnight blue bodies and orange bright wings. And that color combination is one of nature's standard warning labels. But they're not hunting you, they're hunting something else. And what they do to that something else is one of the more disturbing things that happens in the animal kingdom on a regular basis. After mating, a female tarantula hawk begins hunting by smell. When she locates a tarantula's burrow, she sometimes tugs the silk threads around the entrance, mimicking the vibrations of trapped prey to lure the spider out. If she finds a female tarantula already in her burrow, she boldly enters, chases the spider into the open and attacks. The tarantula is bigger, the tarantula has fangs, but none of that really matters. The wasp is faster and more agile, and she only needs to land one precise sting, typically to the underside of the spider's abdomen directly into its nervous system. The tarantula is paralyzed within seconds. The paralysis is permanent. The tarantula will never recover. The wasp may drink fluid oozing from the spider's wounds to replenish energy she used in the fight, then drags the spider, often many times her own weight, back to a burrow, sometimes a tarantula's own. Inside the sealed chamber, she lays a single egg on the spider's abdomen. Then she leaves. What happens next is where it crosses from predation into something that feels like a horror concept. The egg hatches in 3 to 4 days. The larva immediately begins feeding on the immobilized but living spider, sucking hemolymph, the invertebrate equivalent of blood, from its body. It goes through 5 growth stages, progressively consuming more of the spider. During the first 4 stages, it avoids vital organs specifically to keep the tarantula alive. A fresh, living food source keeps far better than a dead one. The spider stays alive for several weeks while this happens. Only in the 5th and final stage does the larva eat the vital organs, finally killing the spider. Then it forms a cocoon and emerges as an adult wasp 2 to 3 weeks later. The tarantula is alive and aware for most of this. It can't move, it can't fight back, it's just there. And this reproductive cycle was actually a significant part of the inspiration behind the creature in the movie Alien from 1979, which makes sense. The screenwriters really didn't have to invent that much. Now about the sting. Because while the wasp isn't hunting humans, it does sting when bothered. And Justin Schmidt, the entomologist who built the pain scale we mentioned with the bullet ant, tested this one too. He described it as blinding, fierce, shockingly electric. A running hairdryer has just been dropped into your bubble bath. A bolt out of the heavens. Lie down and scream. It rates a 4.0 on his scale, tied with the bullet ant for the top spot. The difference between the two is that the bullet ant's pain lasts 24 hours. The tarantula hawk's sting is just as intense, but burns out faster. About 3 to 5 minutes of absolute agony, and then it fades. Schmidt's actual advice for dealing with it is pretty straightforward. He says don't try to walk, don't try to function, just find somewhere soft and wait it out. The pain is so consuming that attempting anything else while it's happening will likely just lead you to injuring yourself by accident. Next up is poison dart frogs. Most species of poison dart frogs are tiny, sometimes less than 1.5 centimeters in adult length. Many of them are some of the most vividly colored animals on the planet. Bright red, electric blue, neon yellow, vivid orange. They sit in plain sight on leaves and logs in the rainforest and don't hide from anything. That's the whole point. Their coloring is an evolutionary adaptation called aposematic coloration, a way of kind of telling every predator in the area, I'm dangerous, don't eat me. It works because the warning is real. The most toxic species is called the golden poison frog. A single 2-inch specimen contains enough batrachotoxin to kill up to 10 humans. The lethal dose is roughly 2 to 3 micrograms per kilogram. For comparison, the feared venom of the box jellyfish has an LD50 of 40 micrograms per kilogram, making batrachotoxin one of the most potent biological toxins ever identified. It only takes an amount equivalent to about 3 grains of salt to be fatal to a person, and there's no effective antidote. The toxin works by irreversibly activating voltage-gated sodium channels in nerves and muscle cells, essentially locking them open and preventing them from closing. This causes nerve cells to fire uncontrollably, leading to convulsions, muscle paralysis, and ultimately heart failure. Indigenous communities, specifically the Choco people of Colombia, used the golden poison frog to coat blow dart tips for hunting. Because the toxin can be absorbed through the skin, they used waxy leaves as gloves when handling the frogs to extract the secretions. And the secretions from a single frog could coat 30 to 50 darts. Now, what's interesting is that these poison dart frogs don't actually make the toxin themselves, they get it from their diet, specifically from eating ants, mites, and other arthropods that contain alkaloids. The frogs eat these insects, absorb the alkaloids during digestion, and store them in glands in their skin. And the clearest proof that it's just the diet is that frogs raised in captivity on a standard diet of fruit flies and crickets never become toxic. Wild caught frogs brought into captivity also gradually lose their toxicity over time. And that's the end of this video. There's actually a lot more that I could cover about this. I didn't even really get into the history of the Amazon forest, or like the diseases you can get there. So if you guys want to see another video about this, I would love to make a part 2, just let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this far though, I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you want to see next in the comments as well. And again, thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. Good night everyone, and sweet dreams.